I knew when I made a video talking about why our girls aren't gluten and casein free that it was going to be controversial. And today I am talking about that subject again. We did a gluten-free and casein-free diet with our older 3 children for 2 years. And one of the first questions that comes up is whether or not we did it seriously. And I can say we did it incredibly seriously. At the time, our son Patrick, who was 1 and who is now 6, had a dairy allergy. And it was the sort of dairy allergy that made him wheeze and gasp for breath if he had any dairy at all. And we had to carry an EpiPen around for him. It was really, really scary. And so I took not having any dairy at all in our kitchen extremely seriously. At the same time, Sadie was having these awful stomach aches, and she had tested positive for low levels of wheat allergy in her blood, and we were really trying to get to the bottom of her stomach aches. And so when Maggie was diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum, it just seemed like the next logical step that, hey, let's just eliminate these for everybody. I'll only make one meal. Our whole entire family will be gluten-free and casein-free, and we'll all eat healthy, and it will be great. We got the GAPS cookbook, we got the GAPS book, and I completely devoted myself to making these meals. And we did it for over 2 years, actually. There was not cheating. And at the time, I really wanted to believe that it was helping, because when Maggie was 3, it was probably the hardest age for us. She was just really frustrated with her lack of ability to communicate with us, between her sensory seeking and I think just us not fully understanding a lot of things yet. It was just a tough time for everybody. Now, before we go any further, I want to give my standard disclaimer. I think that when it comes to issues like this, you should always talk to your doctor. For our kids that have gastro issues, and I think a lot of times with gastro issues, that's something totally different. In this video, I am talking about people who are trying to use a gluten-free and dairy-free diet because they believe that it will cure autism. That is what I'm discussing today. I am not talking about eliminating gluten or dairy from your diet because you or your child have a sensitivity to it. Some people have celiacs, some people have a dairy allergy like Patrick, like Tessie, like James possibly has some sort of a sensitivity or a lactose intolerance. Under the care of our gastroenterologist, both Tessie has tested going off of dairy and is now off of non-baked dairy most of the time. It doesn't affect who she is at all. It doesn't change her brain or her behavior at all, other than the fact that her stomach probably feels better. And yes, when you don't have a stomach ache, you probably are happier and have better behavior. So that, absolutely, I guess that could be the case for some people. We're supposed to be doing a trial of dairy-free for James very soon. And again, he isn't on the spectrum at all, but it's because of gastrointestinal issues under the care of a gastroenterologist and with their guidance. So, I mean, there are reasons to try certain diets under the guidance of a doctor, but curing autism, because it's a different way of thinking, a different way of a different type of neurology that can't be cured, isn't one of the reasons to do one of these diets. And what I want to talk about today is these studies that people bring up, because I have spent a lot of time looking at these studies, and I really do wish that there was a large-scale double-blind study about the gluten-free, casein-free diet, because I think it would be really helpful, and I have a feeling that I know what the results would be from the other double-blind studies that have been done and what their results have been. There hasn't been a large-scale study, and the studies that have been done that had positive results that showed that there were results had some major problems. And that, in part, is what I want to talk about today. Because when people talk about the studies that showed that it works, there's problems with those studies, and they're pretty easy to see, even for someone like me that isn't a doctor. Let's talk about study number 1. Study number 1 is out of Penn State. And the results show that a gluten-free and casein-free diet may help some children who are on the autism spectrum. Okay, let's learn a little bit more about that study. The research in this study is from a survey. Basically, they did an online survey where they asked parents to answer 90 questions, and 387 parents answered 90 questions online about their children's GI symptoms, food allergy diagnoses, suspected food sensitivities, and how well they followed a gluten-free, casein-free diet. And then based on that, they said that they felt that there was a benefit to it. So this entire study was entirely based on online answers from parents who had chosen to do this diet. And that is kind of a big problem. When you're doing this diet, you already are sort of invested in it. And let me tell you, when I did it for 2 years, for me to follow this to a T, inside the home, outside the home, for 2 years, I was incredibly invested in it. And I was incredibly invested in believing that it worked. Of course I was. I was spending more money on gluten-free and casein-free foods. It's cheaper to buy things that are wheat and dairy. And I was spending a ton of time preparing these foods at home because I was basically making every single thing from scratch. It was a ton of work. So there's a level of personal investment when you're doing these diets and you want to believe that they're working. And there's also that additional degree of desperation. When you have a parent who is looking for cures, they are by nature usually pretty desperate. And so I just don't feel that an online survey is all that accurate. We're not even talking about Skype. We're just talking about a questionnaire that anyone could take. And their advice was that if people are going to do a gluten-free, casein-free diet with their children, they need to stick to it in order to receive positive benefits. I'm sorry, that study is basically entirely based on parents' opinions, and it's not actually based on any sort of evidence. And that is highly problematic. Okay, so now we're gonna look at the second study. The next study comes from one of the three autism organizations that I would really try to avoid. They are Dan, TACA, and Autism Speaks. So just gonna start off there. And it says that they used a randomized controlled single-blind 12-month treatment study where they used different nutritional and dietary interventions with 67 children and adults on the spectrum, ages 3 to 58, and 50 non-sibling neurotypical controls of similar age and gender. Now, I'm not going to talk about the wide age range of subjects or anything like that. It's a fairly small group for a study. Okay, it's hard to find a lot of people to do these studies. That seems to be why there hasn't been a large scale study. Okay, just going on with the main problem I have with this is the way that the study was ran is that they began with special vitamins and mineral supplements, then they added in essential fatty acids, then they added in Epsom salt baths, then they added in keratin, then they added in digestive enzymes, and then a healthy gluten-free, dairy-free, soy-free diet. And they found significant improvement in nonverbal intellectual ability in the treatment groups compared to the non-treatment groups, between 6 and 11 IQ points, based on blinded clinical assessment. They did a lot of things here, and it's kind of frustrating because it's like, which of these things do you think helped? I don't know. I mean, I guess they said that the positive results of the study suggest that a comprehensive nutritional and dietary interventions is effective at improving all of these things, the verbal ability, IQ, symptoms, and that overall diet was monitored very closely. So wasn't necessarily that it was gluten-free, dairy-free, or was it that someone could be eating junk food all the time before and now they're eating a really healthy diet, and it's really hard to take that into account too. I don't know. I think the problem with this study is you can't really say that this is a gluten-free, dairy-free diet because they did like 10 different things and they changed like 10 different things amongst a small sample of people in a large age range, and this to me does not prove gluten-free and dairy-free diets work. Test one thing, control everything else, and see what you get. Don't test all of the things and because you don't know what is actually helping. There's one systematic review where basically they searched through all these databases for randomized control trials of gluten-free, casein-free diets. And they ended up including 6 in this review. And what they found was, with few exceptions, there were no significant statistical differences in ASD core symptoms between groups as measured by the standardized scales. Basically, most differences were found in parent-based assessment tools. The conclusion was, overall, there's little evidence of a benefit for a gluten-free, dairy-free diet. Now, several studies have come out from University of Rochester Medical Center examining gluten-free, casein-free diets. At the University of Rochester, they would put the children on diets, and then they would also include snacks, and the snacks looked exactly the same. You couldn't tell if they were the gluten-free snacks and casein-free snacks or if they were the gluten and casein snacks. And what they found was that they had no difference when the children were given the snacks with gluten and casein or the snacks without. One of the takeaways from that study is that we need to be skeptical about treatments that don't really have evidence. Even if they're benign, we don't want families spending time and money that may take away from treatments that we know are effective. Basically, in reading through a great many studies, I found that the studies that were based on parents' opinion were far more likely to yield positive results, and the studies that were double-blind nearly always saw no noticeable results between the gluten-free, casein-free diet and a normal diet that included gluten and casein. As I said before, there are reasons to try different diets, and they usually involve testing, especially when children are involved, and the guidance of your doctor. I would absolutely avoid those doctors who talk about curing autism through diets, because that's really not a thing. And it's absolutely best to stick with doctors who practice evidence-based medicine. This is one that I feel strongly about. When we started our gluten-free, dairy-free diet, we had a kid who ate everything. I had a commenter on my last video who made a comment that I deleted because it also included a lot of self-promotion, who asked, well, would it really be that bad? You don't need wheat, you don't need dairy. But most of the things that she ate included wheat and dairy. And to take those away and to go down to very little and a very limited diet wasn't a positive thing, because it's not like I can physically make her eat things. She used to eat basically everything and now she eats not that much. So I went from a kid who had good blood tests and good nutrition to a kid who does have nutrient deficiencies and who lost 2 pounds in the last year between her doctor's appointments. And that is not a good thing. And honestly, I don't know if that would have happened if we hadn't tried this diet that I deeply regret. If you think your kid has a stomach issue, absolutely see a stomach doctor. But autism is not something that needs to be cured, and you're not going to cure it with a fancy diet or with any of the other crazy snake oil ideas that are out there today. That's it for today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're interested in all things autism, we'd love it if you'd hit subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.